Good morning. Thanks for coming. And I want to thank, I guess he just left, but I want to thank Father Chris for letting me preempt his Rector's Forum here today. I think a lot of familiar faces here, but if you don't come to the Rector's Forum regularly, I'm telling you, you're missing something, because he does a spectacular job, and it's one of the best things here at Trinity. So, my name is Doug L. I'm a member of Trinity, and today we're going to talk about a 2,000-year-old mystery, the Star of Bethlehem. I find there's sort of three approaches to the star. One is that it's sort of in the realm of the Easter Bunny. You know, a lot of people think, well, you know, obviously never happened, and the Bible is, you know, a lot of fiction. Some people will say the star, of course, it happened, it's in the Bible. Bible's the Word of God, but the star was, you know, a supernatural one-time event by God, and that's certainly a legitimate view. But there's a third path, and that's what I'm going to talk about today, which was that Star of Bethlehem was an actual astronomical phenomenon, and that we today, with modern computers and our ability to analyze the sky and figure out what it looked like thousands of years ago, 2,000 years ago, we can know what it is. And one of the, yes, sure. Thank you for telling me. Try to talk louder, thank you. So, I love this subject because I sort of love every subject that reveals the existence of God. I mean, I used to be an atheist and sort of a scientific doubting Thomas. And when I looked at the science, I found the evidence for God overwhelming. And when I look at the Star of Bethlehem evidence, I find that overwhelming too. So we're going to go through it here, and I'm going to read from the Gospels of Matthew and Luke. Those are the two Gospels that have some verses relating to the birth of Jesus, okay? Mark and John do not. And also, I want to tell you, if I could put in a little plug here, I've got a new book out. I've ordered copies to be handed out at the church, but they haven't arrived yet. It's called Proofs of God. It's at the Vero Beach Book Center, if you want it, and it's also available online. And if the book makes any money, I'll give it away, I assure you. Okay, so today we're going to, we've sort of got four subjects that I want to go through. When was Jesus born? Where was he born? You might think you know that one, but there's more to that than perhaps you do. Who the heck were these wise men or magi? Where'd they come from? And what was the Star of Bethlehem? Okay? So it's when, where, who, and what. And after we go through these, we're going to read through the verses in Matthew that talk about the star, and I'm going to give you my interpretation of what's actually going on. Okay, so when was Jesus born? Well, all the early Christian writers, don't ask me to pronounce these names, but I thought it might impress you if I wrote them all down on a slide. All the early Christian writers would tell you that Jesus was born in 2 or 3 BC. So there's a whole bunch of them. That was the accepted position of the church, early church. So what's special about 2 BC? It turns out 2 BC is actually a very special year, believe it or not. It is the high point, many historians will tell you, of the Roman Empire. It's the 750th anniversary of the birth of Rome. It's Augustus's silver jubilee. He's been emperor for 25 years, and he gets awarded this award by the Roman Senate, which he said is one of his crowning achievements. And active war is decreasing, okay? So they're laying off soldiers. Also, Caesar said, basically, this is as big as I want the empire to get. And that's going to be important later on. So at the high point of the Roman Empire, 2 BC. What happens because of this high point Caesar says, let's figure out what we got, and he orders a census. So the Roman Senate orders a census in February 5th, 2 BC. And this should sound familiar. Here's the verse from Luke. In those days, a decree went out from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be registered. So Joseph's with Mary in Nazareth, and he has to go where? Not Jerusalem. He's got to go where? Bethlehem. All right. The next one's easy, right? Where was Jesus born? All right, so it's 90 miles from Nazareth to Bethlehem. So Joseph takes his very pregnant wife 90 miles to follow this Roman decree. Okay, now there's a complication on the death of Jesus, the birth of Jesus, I should tell you about. Josephus, Flavius Josephus is a well-known Jewish historian, and all the early printed copies of his book, Antiquities of the Jews, say that Herod died in 4 BC. So if Herod dies in 4 BC, as you know, he dies after Jesus is born, that would place Jesus' birth before 4 BC, which contradicts what I just told you, right? So because of this, these printed copies, people have come up with other theories about some sort of Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in 7 BC or whatever. But in 1998, somebody said, let me go around the world and check all the handwritten copies of Josephus. And every one of these 29 handwritten copies says that Herod died in 1 BC. So what I want to warn you about, there's a lot of nonsense on this stuff on the internet. So if you read, you will see in what would seem, you would think are, highly documented sources will tell you Herod died in 4 BC and that's the end of the story. No, they're just not familiar with the current research. All 29 handwritten copies of Josephus that predate the first printed versions say Herod died in 1 BC. So they made a typo, whatever you want to call it. Okay, so where? So that sounds easy, Bethlehem, but there's more to the story. So let me just read this, because we're going to come back to this verse. Joseph went from Galilee, from the town of Nazareth, to Judea, the city of David, which is called Bethlehem, because he was of the house and lineage of David. Mary was also of the house and lineage of David, by the way. They're both descended from David. His betrothed, who was with child. And while we were there, the time came for her to give birth. She gave birth to her firstborn son and wrapped him in swaddling clothes and laid him in a manger, because there was no room for them in the inn. Okay, now why Bethlehem? What's significant? Has anybody been to Bethlehem? Where is it compared to Jerusalem? Yeah, I think it's 5 miles south on the main road going to Egypt. Okay, it's also where King David was. And he was a shepherd in Bethlehem. Remember when Samuel comes, God says, I will send you to Jesse the Bethlehemite, for I have provided for myself a king among his sons. And Bethlehem is foretold by Micah as the birthplace of Jesus. Micah was a contemporary of Isaiah, and he lived 700 years before Jesus. And we know from the Dead Sea Scrolls that these Old Testament versions that existed then are the same versions we have now, basically. So it's very clear that Micah prophesied 700 years in advance. That's a pretty long time, what place Jesus was to be born in. And another sort of interesting fact I find is that between Jesus and King David, there's 1,000 years. So the people at that time traced their ancestry back at least 1,000 years, probably to Adam. I mean, if we were all told here we got to go to where our paternal fathers lived 1,000 years ago, I think we'd have trouble figuring out where that was. I sure would. So we have Bethlehem as a place of King David, as a place prophesized, but there's actually another very critical significance to Bethlehem. Any ideas? Well, Bethlehem was where they raised the sacrificial lambs for the temple at Jerusalem. So here's a verse that's from Micah that's not often cited, and I think is just amazing. Micah 4-8, and you, O tower of the flock, hill of the daughter of Zion. Daughter of Zion means the people of Israel here. It's sort of an affectionate, like, you're the daughter of God. To you it shall come, the former dominion shall come, kingship for the daughter of Jerusalem. Well, that's interesting. Tower of the flock sounds sort of poetical, the way it's translated here. But Tower of the Flock is a very specific place. It's Migdal Eder. It's a tower over the fields of sacrificial lambs. Okay, it's mentioned in the book of Genesis as that Rachel, Jacob's wife, who was the father of Joseph and of Benjamin, is buried near there. This is a very specific place in Bethlehem that Micah, I think, is saying Jesus was born there. He's prophesying 700 years in advance, exactly where Jesus is to be born. So this tower is, again, over the fields of the sacrificial lambs. When a ewe was about to give birth, the shepherds would bring her into this tower, into a birthing station below it. And after the baby lamb was born, the shepherds would, you ready for this? They would wrap the lamb in swaddling clothes. It's true. Why did they do that? Because these were sacrificial lambs. They had to be perfect for the temple. And the lambs were clumsy. They didn't want them banging into each other, bruising each other up. So think about it. So what Micah is saying, I believe, is that Jesus was born exactly similar to the sacrificial lambs for the temple at Jerusalem. Okay, he's born in the stall, in the tower, and he's wrapped just like a baby sacrificial lamb would be. And swaddling clothes probably means used priestly garments, most people think. So you can imagine the astonishment of the shepherds who are told they know where to go to find the sacrificial lamb of God. They get there, and he's wrapped exactly like a sacrificial lamb. So that's why Bethlehem. Jesus, and this theme of the Bible is hard to read in a lot of places, but on the basic points, it's pretty clear. Jesus is the sacrificial Lamb of God. Isaiah, he was oppressed and he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth, like a lamb led to the slaughter. When John the Baptist sees Jesus, he says, "Behold the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world." Revelation has many verses about worthy is the Lamb who is slain. So the symbolism here, I believe, couldn't be clearer what Jesus came to do. Okay, so now we're going to get to the wise men. And the Greek word in the Bible is magi. So these aren't just a group of college professors types or something in badly fitting tweed jackets. Okay? These are the Jedi Knights of their age. They are, and where did they come from? Well, here Marco Polo tells us 700 years ago, Marco Polo wrote that in Persia is the city of Sava. The three magi set out, and they're buried there. So he saw their tombs, in very large and beautiful monuments side by side, and above them there is a square building. The bodies are still entire. So Sava, it's 60 miles southwest of Tehran. So how do you get from Sava to Jerusalem? Okay, so if you put it in Google Maps, so you could see they could have got there, they could have taken the main road through Baghdad, 23 hours, that says 17 minutes. No. this is 1,800 kilometers. That's a long ways, well over 1,000 miles, okay? This is desert and mountains here. Probably they would have taken this route, okay, north where avoid the desert. That's sort of the route that Abraham took. Camels travel about 18 miles a day. It would have taken them months to get to Jerusalem from Sava. And Sava, what's going on at that time in the world? Sava is a key city in something called the Parthian Empire. Now, if you're like me, you never heard of the Parthian Empire, at least I didn't until I started this, but it's actually listed as one of the top 10 empires of the ancient world. So here's a map of the Parthian Empire in 1 AD. And the Euphrates River is the border between the Roman territory and the Parthian Empire. Now, you might be inclined, since you don't know anything about the Parthian Empire and you've heard a lot about the Romans, to think that, well, the Parthians were just some sort of savages off to the side. But no. In 53 BC, Crassus, the richest guy in Rome, puts together an army and says, I'm going to be a military conqueror. I'm going to conquer this empire of the Parthians. So he marches up into this area, 40,000 troops. The Parthian king sends an advance army just to slow him down. The Romans outnumber the Parthians 5-1, and the Parthians slaughter them. They defeat 7 Roman legions. They have these heavy mounted cavalry and archers. The Romans basically thought the Parthians were going to run out of arrows, if you can believe that strategy. And the Parthians had hundreds of camels supplying. So out of the 40,000 Roman troops, 20,000 are killed, 10,000 flee for their lives. Crassus is killed. And the other 10,000 Romans are captured. The Parthians get excited and they push over and they take over Palestine in about 40 BC. And they install their own puppet king there. They chase Herod into his mountain fortress of Masada. 37 BC, the Romans come back and they take over Palestine again, and they install their own puppet king, King Herod. But King Herod is very aware who the Parthians are, all right? And they agree that if you stay on your side of the Euphrates and I'll stay on mine, and we're all going to live happily ever after. Again, Julius Caesar says, we're not going to fight them anymore. Augustus Caesar, excuse me. Okay, so the Magi are the Jedi Knights of their age. They are, we tend to think, again, of ancient people as sort of unskilled, unknowing, and they possess technologies that we don't know today. Daniel means judged by God. Father Chris, you asked what that name means. He was appointed chief. He so impressed King Nebuchadnezzar that he was appointed chief of all, sort of like head of their priestly college. Imagine a combination of a church and academic. The Roman historian Philo, a contemporary of Jesus, wrote, among the Persians there's the Magi. Basically, these are the smartest people in the world. Okay, they are also have some role in the Parthian government. When there's a fight over kings, they pick the next king. So now we're going to get to what was the star. So we've got the time, which is 2 BC for Jesus' birth. And we're now going to look at the ancient skies with modern computers. So here's what happens in September 3 BC. By the way, keep in mind that in those days they didn't have the word planet. There were fixed stars and moving stars, okay? So in 3 BC, the planet Jupiter, the king planet to all all ancient civilizations. Jupiter's the king planet. Makes three passes, traces a crown over Regulus. Regulus is the king's star to the Romans and all the other ancient cultures. It's in the constellation of Leo, the lion, and the lion is associated with the tribe of Judah. Genesis says, Judah is a lion's cub. The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until tribute comes to him, and to him shall be the obedience of the peoples. This line from Genesis is predicting the birth of Jesus. So this is September 3 BC, okay? While this is happening on one specific day, so it passes it 3 times. This is a very rare event. This could be the date of Jesus' conception. September, by the way, is the 6th month of the Jewish year. In Luke 1:26, in the 6th month, the angel Gabriel was sent from God to a city called Galilee. Now, if you read that in context, it looks like the 6th month is referring to Mary's cousin Elizabeth, who was pregnant with John the Baptist, to her pregnancy. But it also, if you read it literally, using the calendar then, in the 6th month means September. Okay, so here's what's going on September 11th. I said 2 BC, sorry, it's 3 BC, forgive me. The sun comes up, so Jupiter and Regulus are up here. The sun comes up and it's over the womb of the Virgin in the constellation Virgo. And there is a new moon at the feet of the constellation. This is a very rare event, okay? New moons once every 28 days. The sun over this exact spot once a year. The triple pass of Jupiter over Regulus. So these magi, and by the way, I forgot to say that the Parthian kings are descended from King David. So they weren't Jews, but the Parthians had a Jewish background. They were very proud of that. They named their capital city Isaac after Abraham's son. Okay, so this is September 11th. Some say it's the date of 3 BC, forgive that. Some say it's the date of Jesus' birth, but I think it's the conception because something even more amazing happened 9 months later. But before I get to that, I want to look at this thing again, this picture of the sun in the womb with the moon below, and compare this to John's vision in Revelation. And a great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed by the sun with the moon under her feet and on her head a crown of 12 stars. She was pregnant and was crying out in birth pains and the agony of giving birth. Sounds familiar. Okay, 9 months later, one of the most spectacular planetary conjunctions ever. The two brightest planets in the sky come together for about an hour after sunset in the western sky. And this has only happened something like 3 times in the last 2,000 years. None of these others were visible in the Middle East. I don't know if you've read that there's this, people say Christmas conjunction coming up. I forget what 2 planets, maybe Jupiter and Saturn. They're going to be very close, within 1/10 of a degree on December 21st this year. If you haven't seen that, you may see it. These planets in this are at least 10, maybe a lot times closer. And these are the 2 brightest planets in the sky. This is an amazingly rare event. This is the brightest star anybody of that time will ever see. And I suggest to you that the Magi knew it was coming. Okay? They knew it was coming because there was a artifact discovered off a shipwreck in Greece in 1 BC called the Antikythera mechanism, which sounds weird, but anyhow, it was a clump. And when they x-rayed it, they found out it had maybe 50 gears in it tied to astronomical movements. This thing could predict eclipses, and this was ancient technology. Okay. So this is the brightest star. Oh, by the way, this conjunction takes place in the constellation of Virgo, the Virgin. I suggest this is the date of Jesus' birth, June 17, 2 BC. Okay, now we're going to read through Matthew. And we're going to see now in context, I think, how amazing these verses really are. So here's the beginning of the second chapter of Matthew. And I'm sure you've all seen this 100 times, but let's read it through again. Now, after Jesus was born. Now, notice the word after, okay? I know those nativity scenes are cute where the wise men are kind of creeping in the background. No, they weren't there at the birth, okay? They're there after the birth. After Bethlehem, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, in the days of King Herod, so King Herod's still living, behold, wise men. Again, the Greek word here is magi. So the magi, who are a very specific, known group from the Parthian Empire, from the east came to Jerusalem saying, where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we saw his star as it rose and have come to worship him. Now this verse is just packed, I think. First of all, they walk into Herod the Great's palace in Jerusalem. Herod, like most other rulers at this time, is amazingly paranoid. He killed at least 2 of his own sons because he thought they were going to take over his throne. Okay, so these magi, these Parthian elite, walk in and say, hey, where's the real king? And then they say, we saw his star as it rose. Now, wait a minute. The star, the conjunction set in the west, right, after sunset. What they're saying is, we saw this star in broad daylight because we knew exactly where to look. We knew it was coming. We have come to worship him. Now, I know that you think of by the way, the Bible doesn't say how many magi there were. Marco Polo said there were 3. But they had a long trip to come, okay? They had to go over 1,000 miles. And the Parthians elite didn't travel just casually. They probably had an entourage that may have included thousands of soldiers. You didn't walk through this enemy, through the desert, through the bandits and the local chieftains with gold, unarmed, okay? You just didn't do it back then. They couldn't take that main road through Baghdad and get there in 23 hours. So, I mean, like when the Parthians accepted an ambassador from China, they showed up to greet him with 20,000 mounted cavalry. When there's other instances of Parthian elite traveling around with 10,000 soldiers. So I suggest the Magi come to Jerusalem with an army. And King Herod is going berserk. Okay? He knows these people. He knows he's also, he can't have them killed because then he could be in big trouble with Caesar Augustus, who said basically, we don't want any more fighting with these guys. But the Magi show up and say, where's the real king? Okay, so when Herod heard this, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. Jerusalem is troubled because they're wondering if they're going to have a war, I suggest. And by the way, I'm fine if you don't agree with me on this. If you want to tell me later, Doug, that was the stupidest theory I ever heard of, that's fine. But this is how I see it, okay? So they have this armed force outside of Jerusalem. And Herod says, where's this Christ, this Messiah, who, by the way, the Parthians knew the prophecies of a Messiah of the Jews. Where is this guy supposed to be born? And the chief priests tell him, of course, quoting Micah, Bethlehem. So they told him in Bethlehem of Judea, and then the Bible gives again this verse from Micah. O you, O Bethlehem, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for from you shall come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel. Okay, so we have the wise men showing up with their army in, and by the way, Herod doesn't have a clue, so I don't think what this star was. So it wasn't some sort of comet or supernova or something that would have been visible to everybody. Herod doesn't have clue, which shows, again, the advanced technology or learning of the Magi. So he gets the wise men together quickly and secretly says, when did this star appear? And they tell him, June 17. And he says, you know, Herod's pretty sneaky. So, you go ahead. He can't go with them because they got their own army. He doesn't want to go with them. But he says, you go ahead and find this, and then let me know because I'm going to come worship him. Yeah, right, huh? So that's what he says. And so off they go. Now, by the way, if Jesus is born in June, maybe the wise men are getting there months and months later, okay? So I'm going to suggest that they get there in December 2 BC. So, and after listening to the king, they went on their way. And behold, the star that they had seen when it rose. So remember, they saw this conjunction when it started to rise, and then the planets got closer and closer together until it set. Indistinguishable from the naked eye. You couldn't see anything different. Then the Bible says, came to rest over the place where the child was. So I'm going to suggest they walked out of Herod's palace. They're only 5 miles from where they want to be in Bethlehem, okay? They walk out in the evening on December 25th. At that point, Jupiter is directly south of Jerusalem. They follow it south. Now, came to rest over the place where the child was, I don't know, but I will tell you on December 25th, Jupiter goes into what's called retrograde motion, which means it stops. So, you know, Matthew's writing this later, maybe he gets it a little confused, but Jupiter stops in the sky, and the wise men, again, they know this. And it says, where the child was. Okay, where they saw the star, they rejoiced. Going into the house, so Jesus isn't in that stall in the tower anymore, he's now in a house. They saw the child, this isn't an infant, the Greek word is different. They saw the child, fell down and worshiped him. They give him the gifts, and being warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they departed to their own country in another way. So the military force moves out. This is actually quite an insult to the Romans that the Parthians come in with a military force. And the Romans don't like this kind of insult. So it turns out that, and there's a lot of turmoil going on in Rome, in 1 AD, the Romans marched toward the Parthians with a new army. And the Parthian king goes out with his army to meet them. The two armies line up on opposite sides of the Euphrates. The Roman leader and the Parthian king meet at an island in the middle of the river. And I suspect the conversation went sort of like, this, by the way, is historical fact that they met. What they said, I'm just going to say, the Romans said, well, why'd you come into our territory with that army? What's going on? And Parthians said, well, there was a great king born. Romans say, yeah, sure. But anyhow, they averted war. They decided to stay on their own sides of the Euphrates. Okay, so I've covered this. Okay, so the Magi, I'm suggesting that December 25th, and nobody knows why Christmas is the day it is really. Someone said before that it was a pagan holiday, perhaps, and perhaps it was. I looked it up, and the evidence is confusing on that. But it is the date that in 2 BC that Jupiter stops moving in the sky, and a December date fits in with the time period. It would have taken the Magi a lot of time to get their army, their entourage together, and get over 1,000 miles to Jerusalem. Okay, now Herod saw that he'd been tricked, became furious, so Herod reverts true to form. And he says, kill all the male children in Bethlehem and in all that region who are 2 years or older, according to the time that he was ascertained from the wise men. So I'm suggesting this fits the timeline, okay? If Jesus was about 6, 7 months old when the Magi were there, Herod says, well, let's make sure we get this guy. kill everybody under 2 years. If Jesus was 2 or 3 years old, Herod would say, well, go to 5 or 6 years. Herod doesn't really care how many people he kills. So I think this fits the concept of Jesus being 6 months old at the time the wise men get there. Okay, so a final comment, and then if you have questions. But I just want to point out that the heavens operate like clockwork. For all these events to happen exactly as they did, then God had to have known the exact moment of Jesus' birth when he flung the universe into existence. I mean, I think that's just amazing. All these things God knew were going to happen at this time in order for the heavens to declare the glory of God and to signal the birth of Jesus. So, if that messes up your versions of some Christmas carols, I'm sorry, but that's how I see it. Yeah, what you got?
You said Jupiter stopped rotating?
No, not rotating. The planets move through the sky, as you know, but there are times when they stop. It's sort of like if you're on a highway and you're passing another car. So the planets will go around the sun. The Earth's on the inside track. The Earth's going a little faster. At some point, the outside planet stops against the background stars. And that's what happened here. So Jupiter stops, and then it starts going backwards against the background skies. It's all an illusion because of the movements of the two planets around the sun. Jupiter's going a lot slower. It takes 12 years to go around the sun. Jupiter's in the outside lane. Earth is zipping around on our 1-year cycle, and we go past Jupiter, and it looks for a second, or a short period of time, like Jupiter stops. Yes?
It looks like it stops because it's traveling towards us or away from us. So our path is the same, or it's coming towards us. So it actually looks like it stops, but then as we veer off to what you're talking about, our circles, then it starts moving again.
Yeah.
It's always been moving. It never really
Right. It never really stopped, but it looks like it stopped.
Right.
Thank you. Other questions?
When the Magi come, are they traveling north? When they went through the mountains and everything?
Well, we don't know. We don't know their path.
All the fables.
No, I'm sorry. They're generally heading west. Okay? They're from the east. They're heading west. And every night as they're traveling, it's a good point I forgot to mention, thank you. Every night as they're traveling, they see Jupiter in the west. They travel towards the star. Now, their path probably took them a few degrees off, but generally they're going west, and the star is west every night on their travels.
At the beginning of the night. It's the first thing.
At the beginning of the night, yeah, exactly. And Jupiter's a pretty bright planet next to Venus. It's the brightest planet in the sky. A lot of times you look up, you see a bright star. It's really the planet Jupiter. Yeah, something in the back.
I think you indicated that the Magi were expecting this to happen.
Yes.
How did they know that? I mean, they weren't Jews, right?
No, they weren't Jews. They knew they weren't familiar with the Bible totally. They didn't know Bethlehem was the place, but they knew there was they knew that the prophecies of a Messiah. What I'm saying is they could predict when Jupiter and Venus were going to come into what's called conjunction, come together in the sky, because they had the technology to do that. They had these mechanisms, and I see no other meaning to that clear phrase that we saw his star as it rose, meaning in daylight.
But they were with the understanding that the King of the Jews was being born, right?
Yeah.
So how did they come to that realization?
Well, because I think they knew the prophecies of a Messiah. On the conception of Jesus, that takes place in the constellation of Leo the Lion, which is, the lion is associated with the tribe of Judah at that time to these people. So it's a king being born in Judah, and then when they see this event happening 9 months later, which they probably didn't realize was going to happen originally, but suddenly they're looking at their charts, whatever, their mechanisms, and they see it all points, and there's probably other things that I don't know about here, but all the stars, all the heavenly signs, we saw the moon, the sun, it all points towards the birth of a great king in Israel. Yes?
To answer his question, the Magi, the royal astronomers, they would have been tasked with knowing all kinds of things about other kings, competing kings to theirs. Part of their job was to tell the king, hey, these guys, they were kind of the think tanks, like the Center for Strategic Studies of their day. Hey, we think that something's going to go on over here, and these guys might be trouble for us. So they would be familiar with and study the other cultures, the other powers of their day. So they would be familiar with that as much as they would be familiar with their own, the business of their own kings. That was kind of what they were tasked to do. As the king would say, tell me what's going on in the world. So they'd sit around and study the Bible.
Right.
Study all of that to say, hey, something's going on here, we need to be prepared for that.
These were not ignorant men, okay? And again, the closest analogy I can come to is Jedi Knights. I mean, they must have scared the heck out of Herod, also because this war in 40 to 37 BC, where the Romans pushed the Parthians out of Palestine, that was closer at the time of Jesus than World War II is today. Okay, so they were vividly aware of it, and probably the Jews liked the Parthians better than the Romans. So Herod is really scared when a Parthian army shows up in his backyard, right, at his front yard. Yes, Steve?
Yeah, Doug, do you know why it is that Christ was born in BC? Was there a historical mistake that...
No, it's 2 BC because I think that's the highlight of the Roman Empire, and it fits the astronomical evidence. It also, again, the Roman Senate orders a census in 2 BC. And keep in mind that there's no year zero. I think it all works with the 30-year plus ministry of Jesus. I think we're out of time. Thank you very much for coming. Have a Merry Christmas.